Hey everybody. So this is your mini lesson on French pronunciation simplified. Okay, so we all know that when it comes to pronunciation, that seems to be the most challenging when learning French. So the last thing I want is for anyone to be intimidated or not to want to move forward because of French pronunciation. So I want to start you out with pronunciation from the get-go. All right. So that you can move forward in French, so you can learn French, so you can move to France, go to Quebec, or any other French-speaking area. So I wanted to cover a lot. I had to reduce it down. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I want to remind you of, well, at least my two must when you're learning a language, two things you must do to learn French or any other language. For those of you that have learned another language, you know this. The number one thing you must do is expose yourself. Expose yourself to the language. So expose yourself to music, to the news, to books, to television, to people speaking the language. Expose yourself to the element of the language that you want to master, especially. For example, if you want to master speaking, make sure you're listening, okay? Listening to the news. Make sure you're speaking, of course. Put yourself in situations where you can speak French. If you just want to read French literature, then, pick up some French books. But most people want to speak French, and a lot of the frustration comes from pronunciation. French does not sound like it looks. But once you master those mute sounds, the silent sounds, the sounds that are a little bit different in French than they are in English, you are good to go. All right, so that's what we're going to work on today. So that brings me to the second element of learning French or any other language, and that's repetition. And this is where people tend to get a little bored, okay? Because we don't want to repeat the same thing over and over and over. But this is how we learned our first language, okay? We see a dog, we point to it, our mom, dad, whoever says dog. Okay, we listen. Then they say dog again. Then we say dog. All right? And then we say dog many times before we get it right, okay? So, I'm a big believer in repetition. So, in this video, and in all of the videos, when I pronounce a French sound or a French word, I'm going to pause. I'm going to pronounce it or say it twice. And then I'm going to pause, leaving you enough time to pronounce it or say it twice. And then I'm going to say it one more time so that you confirm that you've been pronouncing it correctly. All right? Now, I don't expect you to get it in 2 repetitions or 2 pronunciations. Some people do. Okay? Maybe you have a knack for that. I don't expect you to, though. But that's what's good about this video. You'll have it. You can play it again and again and again. Okay, so again, I'm going to say each word in French twice, and then I'll pause to allow you time to repeat after me, at least twice. And then I'll say the word again, just to confirm what you've just said. All right? So let's go ahead and get started. I'm a little thirsty first, hold on. So, French wine makes you speak French a little better, or it helps you. All right, so what's covered in this mini lesson? First, we're going to cover the double vowel sounds. All right, next we're going to have vowel combination sounds. If you don't know what this is, don't worry about it. All right, as long as you know how to say it, I'm going to teach you that today. The third thing I'm going to cover are some irregular consonant sounds. So just some consonants that sound different in French than they do in English. Number 4, some unusual sounds. All right, some things you may encounter in French, you will encounter in French that you don't in English. Number 5, it's kind of oxymoron, silent sounds. That's why I crossed out sounds, because they don't make a sound. So you may know if you've tried to learn French before, or maybe if you learned in the past and you're just trying to reactivate it. There's a lot of silent or mute sounds in French, okay? Once you master what these sounds are, you're good to go. All right, so I'm going to talk about some of those sounds. And then number 6, I get a lot of questions about stress in French. In English, we stress words. In Spanish, you certainly have to learn where to put the stress in a word. So I'm going to talk about that in French today. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover. So my first sound is a double vowel sound. That's an AU. Okay, in French, the AU sound is going to sound like an O, like in the word over. So go ahead and say the English word over so that you can hear that sound. O, over. Over. Good. Now let's speak some French. So I have a few words here in French that use that AU. First word is going to be aussi. Aussi. Go ahead. Aussi. Good. As you can see, I have the English equivalent to each word in parentheses. So you are gaining some vocabulary through this lesson as well. I'm not going to go ahead and say the English words because we're not learning English here, but I do have them there for you for reference. All right. So our second word is beau. Beau. So go ahead and say beau. Beau. Very good. All right. The next word we have uses the O as its own word. And this word is café au lait. So I included this because we hear this word a lot around New Orleans. If you go to Café du Monde, if you order beignets, you always get a café au lait with it. So that's what you're hearing here. You're hearing that AU sound. So if you live in New Orleans or you've been to New Orleans, you've ordered beignets and café au lait, you already know this sound, okay? So now you know what the word looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat it twice, and then I'll allow you time to repeat the word. So café au lait. Café au lait. Café au lait. Awesome. All right, the next sound is a vowel combination of an O and an I. All right, this sound comes out completely different to what our equivalent is in English, which is going to be wa. So the OI in French makes a wa sound, like in water or wax. So go ahead and say the English word wax, just so you can hear it. Wa, wax. Perfect. All right, now look at the examples I have here. I have the word poisson. So let's go ahead and say that after me. Poisson. Poisson. Good. All right, our next word with that OI, wa sound is moi. Moi. Go ahead. Moi. Very good. All right, and then our next word is toi. Toi. Go ahead. Toi. Now, the word toi, not only does it have the wa sound from the OI, but you also have the R sound, that infamous French R, which we're going to talk about in a couple minutes. And then you also have that silent S at the end. So if you weren't able to get that word just yet, that's okay. All right, we'll cover that. So next we have consonants. So the J and the G in French are going to sound like slightly like a Z sound in English. All right, the examples I have for you are the English word pleasure. So think about the S in the word pleasure and go ahead and say that word, pleasure. Pleasure. All right, you should hear a little or feel rather a vibration at the tip of your tongue from the S in pleasure. It's the same sensation you get when we say the word mirage. So go ahead and say mirage. Mirage. All right, so that's the G in mirage. So we're going to get that sound with a J and a G in French. So let's practice. Let's look at the French examples. First, I have jupe, jupe. Go ahead. Jupe. Good. All right. The next word is boulangerie. Boulangerie. Go ahead. Boulangerie. All right, that's kind of a long one, so if you don't have that one just yet, that's okay. Our next word is jour. Jour. Go ahead. Jour. All right, and our last one is a lovely French car, and that's a Peugeot. So go ahead, Peugeot. Peugeot. Good. Peugeot. All right, we have a nice picture of a Peugeot there. So that's going to be the G sound. All right, so that's the J and the G in French. All right, next, a sound that's very different in French than it is in English is going to be the CH sound. So the French CH is going to be a soft sound. It's going to be the equivalent to our SH sound in English, like shh, or like in the word shirt. All right, so the CH in French, again, it's shh or shirt or shh, like when you say shh. All right, so some examples of French words using this sound are chaise, chaise. Go ahead. Good. Chaise. All right. Our next example is a very unique French word because it doesn't literally translate into English, but it usually means like at the home of, at the place of, or the business of, and that word is chez. So let's go ahead and say chez. Good. Chez. So places you'll see this word chez are likely to pop up around French cities in the names of restaurants, and it just means at the place of or so-and-so's place. For example, this image I have here is a restaurant in Paris called Chez Denis, and that just means Dennis's place, okay, Dennis's restaurant. So that's chez. All right. Next we have the consonant, the very infamous R or R in French. R. All right, it took me years to get this one down, but I've got a shortcut for you. It's worked with all of my students thus far. I want you to put a couple of your fingers, two of your fingers on your throat, and imagine you have something in your throat that you want to get out or that you're gargling, okay? You've just taken a big swig of Listerine and you're gargling. So I want you to, it's kind of a gross sound, but go for it. All right, make this sound so that you can feel the sensation in your throat. Okay, that's what you want to feel when you say the French guttural R. All right, so that's what we call in linguistics a guttural sound, meaning it comes from your gutter, all right, your throat, that's your gutter. So if you speak Arabic, you know how to make this guttural sound. If you speak English, we don't. It's very, very foreign to us, all right? But I know that you can get this. So the French R, again, it's pronounced from the back of the throat. You need to imagine that you're gargling when you say the French R. So let's look at the examples. The first word I have is robe. Robe. Now, when you attempt to say this, I want you to put your fingers on your throat, all right? And then imagine you're gargling, and then say the word robe. 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 Good. You should feel vibration in your throat. That's the French guttural R. Now, if you know some Spanish or you've studied some Spanish, know that their R comes from the front of the mouth, from the tip of the tongue. whereas the French R comes from the throat. It's guttural, especially if you're in Paris. The guttural R is very strong in Paris, okay? You may not hear it as much in Quebec or Montreal, for example, but you're going to hear it a lot in Paris. All right, so our next example is the word trois. Trois. All right, so let's go ahead and try that. Fingers on your throat to make sure you're pronouncing that guttural R. Trois. Trois. Go ahead. Trois. Awesome. All right, so these are some unusual sounds in French. All right, what makes these unusual? These endings here. Let's look at them. When a word in French ends in a ER, an EZ, or an E accent aigu. If you're wondering what that is, it's this little forward-facing dash on top of the E. We call that an accent in French, and particularly that is the accent aigu. All right, so when you see a word in French that ends in an ER, an EZ, or an E with an accent aigu, they're going to make one sound, the same sound. All right? It's going to be the same sound that we hear when we say the word in English, play. It's going to be the same as the A in English. So go ahead and say the English word play. Play. All right, that is the sound that you want when you have a word ending in an E or an EZ or an E accent aigu. Accent aigu, accent aigu. All right, so let's look at some examples I have here. I have first ne. So it's pronounced ne. So listen, play in English, French, ne. Ne. Go ahead and say that. Ne. Good. Ne. Perfect. All right. Our next word is the verb parler. Parler. So go ahead and repeat after me. Parler. Parler. Great. All right. Now the next word you see has that accent mark on it. All right. So listen to the pronunciation for this. It's going to be parler. Parler. You're probably thinking that sounds just like the word before. It does. It's the exact same pronunciation. That's what makes French so much fun, okay? Two completely different words. Well, not completely, actually. They're the same root in the verb that they are. But two different words with the same sound. All right? But I'm going to give you hints in the future to be able to differentiate between these words, but just know that they have the same sound. So a word that ends in an ER is going to have the same ending sound as a word that ends with the E and the accent aigu. All right? So I want you to pronounce this last example with me or after me. It's parler. Parler. Go ahead. Parler. Good. All right, so the difference between these two words, the first one with the ER is the infinitive form of the verb, if you want to know a little grammar. And the last form of the verb is what we call the past participle, so it is expressing the past tense in French. Okay? So, silent letters. Okay, silent letters in French. There's a lot of mute letters in French. There's a lot of mute sounds, a lot of silent sounds in French. So we're going to talk about what are those sounds. So the first one that there's no exceptions, it's always mute, it's always silent. That's going to be your H. All right. So whether an H is at the beginning of a word or in the middle of the word, which sometimes we see it in the middle of the word in French, but mostly at the beginning, just pretend it's not there. It's easy. All right. So you're going to pronounce the word like the H is not there. It is mute. So let's look at our examples. First, I have hôtel. Hôtel. Go ahead. hôtel. Très bien, good. All right, the next example we have is homme. 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 Good. Okay, you just pronounce it like the H is not there. All right, so in French we have some other silent sounds. If you happen to see one of my previous videos about the S, the T, and the D, you know that those letters are silent at the end of a word in French. So we have a few other letters. So I'm going to just run quickly over the S, T, and D again if you haven't seen my other video. And then the Z and also the X in French, if it's at the end of the word, it is silent. Again, the S, the T, the D, the Z, and the X at the end of a word in French is going to be silent. Now, I have to give you this disclaimer. There are a few exceptions to this rule, but not many. Okay? For the most part, the S, the T, the D, the Z, and the X at the end of any French word is going to be silent. So, let's look at these examples. We have first, do. Now, if you're looking at this word, you can see it's spelled D-O-S. I'm not pronouncing the S. I'm only pronouncing the D and the O. So, it sounds like this. Do. Do. Go ahead. Do. Good. All right. The next word is lit. Lit. Go ahead. Lit. Good. You're only pronouncing the L and the I. Okay, not the T. All right, the next word is going to be canard. Canard. As you can hear, I'm completely dropping the D. Now, that doesn't mean that you drop this letter when you write out the word. It is never dropped visually, okay, physically. The letter is always going to be there. It's only dropped when you pronounce the word, all right? So the D is still part of the spelling, as is the S and the T. So the word is going to be pronounced canard. Canard. Go ahead. Canard. Awesome. All right, the next example is another S at the end of a word. I've included this one because we hear it so much, especially if you're interested in the history of France. There were so many kings with this name of Louis. So Louis, as we would say in English, is pronounced Louis in French. No S. You don't hear the S at all. So go ahead and repeat after me. Louis. 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 Très bien. Good. Very good. All right, our next example is a word ending in an X. It's a word we've seen before, and it can end in an X sometimes. But when we see that X, we just don't pronounce it. All right, and that word is beau. Beau. Go ahead. Beau. Awesome. Good. And our last example is a word ending in a Z. And it's an example that we've seen earlier, and that is né. Né. So go ahead. Né. Very good. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is stress. When you stress a word in French, it's a question I get a lot. When do you stress a word in French? Well, first I'm going to talk about English. In English, we stress the first syllable of a word, meaning we emphasize the first syllable of a word. Okay, the first syllable is a little bit louder in English. I have 3 examples for you there. I have factory, window, rabbit. Okay, as you can hear, the first syllable is slightly emphasized. Now, if you speak Spanish, you know that stress is very important when learning Spanish. you stress certain syllables. It's not always the first, the middle, the last. There's different rules, and it depends on the actual word as to which syllable you stress. Stress is very important in Spanish because it can differentiate between completely different words where the stress falls in the word. All right, so I had a lot of people asking me about stress in French. The good news is, in French, we pronounce each syllable of the word with equal stress, okay, with equal emphasis. So what this does, it produces a very even sound. So maybe you've heard, or maybe you've thought when you've heard French being spoken, wow, what a beautiful language. Well, there's a few things that contribute to French sounding so beautiful, and this is one of them, okay? The stress of each syllable being equal, okay, is what produces the language of French and making it sound so beautiful. All right? So, that is all for now. Fin. If you've ever seen that at the end of a movie in French, or at any movie, it means the end. It's French for the end. So that is the end. I did not include all that I wanted to include in this video because it's probably already running at about 20 minutes, and that's already kind of long. So if you have any other questions about pronunciation, or you'd like to see any other videos regarding different things with pronunciation in French, feel free to ask me. Feel free to leave me your comments. Tell me what you think. Was this helpful? Was it not? How can it be improved? Just let me know, okay, if you have questions. I hope this was helpful. Just either reply with your questions or put them in the comments. I would love to know. All right, thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for repeating and for learning French. All right, good night, y'all.